here at KPFZ 88.1 FM, Lake County Community Radio. This show is Turning Point, and I'm Ron.
And I'm Ray.
And we have a really, really special guest today that we're needing to get to here right away. And I want to, because I know it's such a thrill for Evie, Ray, I want to let Ray introduce our guest here. So
we have Dr. Vandana Shiva with us today. Forbes once identified her as one of the 7 most powerful women in the world. And her work has moved so many of us into a position of knowing that we also have to be courageous activists. So thank you for being with us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yes. So, we, of course, read a lot about your background. We knew about what you are currently doing. But what I would like to know is what prepared you for the work you are doing? What prepared you?
I think all of life prepares one for the next little step of life. And there's no part of it that you can discount. Definitely the fact that I grew up in the Himalaya, so I knew an ecosystem that is so precious, so beautiful. And those mountains let you know that you are a small part of an ecosystem. When you're up in the Himalaya and those Hawaii peaks, you can never feel you are the master.
Yes.
You just have to have a sense of humility. And then I was very fortunate to very early. I was fortunate to have been born to a father who was a forest conservator and also joined the Chipko movement as a young student. This beautiful movement where women said, we are going to hug the trees if you cut them. We'll give our lives, but we won't let you destroy our forests, which are our mothers, which give us soil and water and pure air. And scientists were 40 years behind illiterate women of the Himalayan villages. Now they talk of ecological services and functions of forests. That time, it was only timber mines, just as today, the fossil fuels are to be exploited. Living resources and life forms are just genetic mines, and this kind of mechanistic thought. But then my training, I chose my training in physics very, very carefully. The fact that I did a Ph.D. in the foundations of quantum theory was because I really did want to hone in intellectually on every aspect of quantum theory that transcended the mechanistic worldview. I chose that to be my dedicated intellectual search. So my quantum training, my ecological activist training, and then for 40 years the combination of ecological scientific research and ecological activism have all allowed me to be of service in a small way.
In a large way, if you ask me, Doctor. I just want to thank you for giving folks an example of what a responsible human might look like in these days. And it's a rare thing. And I can tell you that here on this radio station, our listeners are constantly getting clips from your speaking engagements. And everybody here that listens to this station really appreciates your work. And so I wanted to thank you on behalf of all of our listeners. But I also wanted to just kind of jump into this area of, GMOs. And I wanted to ask you, if you would, to help some of our listeners who might not be clear on this, if you could explain the basic differences between genetic engineering, gene splicing, and traditional animal or plant husbandry that's been going on,
Yeah. So the first difference really is a difference between a mechanistic approach to living systems. And it's very interesting, the Pope's encyclical that will come out tomorrow talks about not looking at diversity and species as if they are objects to be exploitation. Even the Pope says they have intrinsic worth. Now, all of plant breeding and animal breeding, whether it was by farmers and pastoralists or it was by conventional breeders, recognized the integrity of the plant and the intelligence of the plant. And they applied their intelligence with that of the plant. The difference between genetic engineering and conventional breeding is, in genetic engineering, the assumption is there's only one intelligence, and that's of the exploiter. That is why GMOs always go hand in hand with property rights, royalty collections, patents, and the consequences that all of that leads to. Yes. In fact, I happen to have been at a meeting in '87 where the chemical corporations that were becoming the new biotechnology corporations and now control the seed said very honestly, we have to do genetic engineering because our profits will now only come from royalties from seed. And if only when we tinker through the tools of recombinant DNA, we can pretend that we've made a new life form, we've added something new. So this idea of treating life forms as machines rather than self-organized entities is the first difference. The second big difference leading from that is the issue of property rights, as I mentioned. The third big difference, of course, is that while when you do conventional breeding or you do selection and you're working with the plant or you're working with the animal, you are working with the whole organism. Mm-hmm. And the organism, because it has intelligence with mechanistic science, which believes nature is dead matter, it can't see it. And therefore, if you see the analysis of those who promote genetic engineering, they talk about genetic engineering being more accurate because now we are working with one gene or two genes or three genes. Mm-hmm. But you're working in ignorance of how the rest of the genes work. And you're not trusting the regulation that's built into self-organized systems, which is what life is about. I've just done a column this morning in my regular writing for a newspaper in India. It's Asian Age, and your listeners can read it. If they go to Asian Age and look for soil papered over, they will find an analysis of some of this. Mm. Now, when you add one gene, are you being accurate? No, you don't even know what is happening. You don't know if the gene is being introduced because there are two clumsy ways you do it. One is through a gene gun, not the whole plant with the whole plant, not rice with rice. You're now transcending genetic barriers, and you're shooting with a gene gun or infecting with a plant cancer called agrobacterium. These are blind shootings, literally, one a biological shooting, the other, loading on a gold particle. Because it's inaccurate, you have to add an antibiotic resistance marker. So first, conventional breeding never has genes from other species. Never. Genetic engineering does. Mm-hmm. Second, conventional breeding never adds antibiotic resistance markers because it doesn't need to, since it's allowing the entire rice plant to work with another rice plant, with you becoming a third part in this co-evolution, as I would call it. The antibiotic resistance marker has only one function, separating the cells from those that absorb the gene from those that didn't. Mm-hmm. And then because you are introducing a gene that doesn't belong to that organism, there's a tendency to silence it, there's a tendency to reject it, and therefore a third gene is always added, which is an antibiotic, which is a viral promoter. These three genes, the first gene added is either a Bt toxin or a herbicide tolerance gene. Yes. An antibiotic resistance marker, we already have a huge problem with antibiotic resistance. Can you imagine antibiotic resistance genes jumping from the food we eat, and jumping genes and horizontal gene transfer is an established scientific phenomenon. And then you have viral promoters, hybridization of the viruses that enter through our food system and the viruses in our gut that are native have a potential to hybridize. All of this is a recipe for disaster, but worse, the disaster is not even looking scientifically. I'll give you one example of how unscientific the whole approach is. You might have heard that WHO, the World Health Organization, has talked about glyphosate Roundup as a potential carcinogen.
Yes.
Monsanto has gone out of its way that Roundup cannot affect the human body because we don't have a metabolic pathway which is called the shikimate pathway. They say plants have it, we don't have it, and therefore we are safe. The plants can be killed with glyphosate and Roundup, we are fine. But we are 600 trillion cells, most of which are bacterial. They have a shikimate pathway, and Roundup is killing them in our gut, which is why so many of the new epidemic diseases of the United States are now being identified as being related to the disruption of our gut biome. They can lie that straightforwardly, that we don't have the shikimate pathway, as if the bacteria in our gut won't get affected. And then, instead of doing honest science, they go ahead and trash honest scientists like Dr. Seralini, whose research is being vindicated every day with every finding of every independent scientist. And wouldn't you want to know why a child is falling sick? Wouldn't you want to know whether your food has residues of glyphosate or has Bt toxins? Doesn't every U.S. citizen have a right to know what they're eating? Don't they have a right to labeling? Look at the assault on democracy in the U.S. through attacks on the right to know and the labeling initiatives in 4 states, and now the attempt to sue Vermont because it passed a law for labeling.
Yes.
So it's a political disaster, a democratic disaster, definitely a scientific disaster, and an ecological disaster.
In some ways, it seems to me that what you're saying is, I'm going to steal a quote from Donald Rumsfeld here. We have known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns, and the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns are being completely ignored or barred from the conversation in lieu of...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And there's a substitution of science and knowledge with A, false assumptions, and 2, propaganda. The false assumptions are this. Quite clearly, when you've made when you shot a new gene into a plant, and you have added a novel gene, which you now claim to be the reason you can pretend to be the creator and inventor and owner of that plant, because you're saying it's new. When it comes to safety, you turn around and say, oh, no, it's just like nature made it. There's no difference.
Yeah.
So I call this ontological schizophrenia. Sadly, after we got into international law through the Convention on the Conservation of Biological Diversity at the Earth Summit, where the climate treaty was also signed, Senior President Bush walked out because we'd introduced a clause called Article 19.3 to say we have to assess the impact of GMOs on biodiversity.
Yes.
He said, I'm not going to allow my biotech industry to go down the drain. He had before that told Monsanto, tell me what you need done and I'll do it. And there's a very good film for your listeners called The World According to Monsanto, which has a clip of President Bush in Monsanto labs making a commitment. President Bush comes back from Rio, gets that his vice president, I think it was Dan Quayle, who couldn't spell potato, but he spelled a very long phrase called substantial equivalence, which is that ontological schizophrenia. Pretend a potato with a Bt toxin is exactly like a potato without a Bt toxin. Don't look, don't see, don't find, and declare your ignorance to be a proof of safety. And then, of course, you have all of the propaganda machinery.
Yes.
Instead of doing science, instead of doing research, instead of finding out why so many children in the U.S. are autistic today, why intestinal disorders have become so commonplace, what is happening? All the money, including of the Gates Foundation, is being poured into a whole new discipline called science communication. Willing people to tell lies. Call it science communication. Can you imagine the wastage at a time where we are in such a precarious situation in terms of the planet's health, in terms of our own health, in terms of the well-being of our farmers? 300,000 farmers in India have committed suicide. And the suicide epidemic started after Monsanto entered India illegally I have to keep reminding people, illegally. I had a court case for 4 years on the illegal entry of Monsanto and illegal collection of royalties because they were so greedy, they rushed in when we didn't allow patents on seed, and we still don't allow patents on living resources and biological resources. So they just collected royalties in the name of a technology fee and a technology trade.
Yes.
And have taken 900 million out of the country. Our farmers are that much poorer. They're in debt. They're committing suicide. Seeds that used to cost 5 rupees and 10 rupees shot up to costing nearly 3,700, 4,000 rupees a kilogram.
Wow.
That's what is the cause of the debt and the suicide.
Right.
Doctor, can I ask you, I'd like to really head down this road of protecting the biodiversity of the planet here. And so I'd like you to hopefully comment on the issue of and the dangers of cross-pollination contamination from GMOs to naturally occurring crops and plants.
Right.
Well, contamination is inevitable. When we wrote the law in 1992, there were no commercial crops, but we could project and say, if pollen carries, then pollen will carry these introduced traits.
Right.
So you have the case of Percy Smicer, the Canadian farmer sued by Monsanto after Monsanto contaminated his canola crop.
Yes.
And said, our genes are in your crop. Sued him for $200,000. Currently, there's a case going on in Australia where a farmer called Steve Marsh lost his organic canola. In the U.S., there are two very, very big stories. One of the rice. This was a Bayer experiment and trial which contaminated the rice shipments, and the U.S. lost millions of dollars. And then the wheat, the GM wheat that was found in Oregon, that also led to the rejection of wheat from
as exports. Yeah.
Because pollination is inevitable, contamination through pollen flow is inevitable.
Right.
And they can talk about refugia, which is what they talk about, of 2 meters, which first of all doesn't get implemented. But secondly, when bees and butterflies, look at the monarch butterfly, goes all the way from the northern part of North America to Mexico.
Right.
What are you talking about 2 meters as protection zones? And we've seen what happened with the pollinators, both with the bees because of neonicotinoids as well as the Bt toxin plants. There was a Cornell study showing that Bt corn killed the larvae of the monarch and the normal corn did not. And the Roundup spraying kills the milkweed, which has killed the habitat for the monarch. And it's an acknowledgement by Monsanto that they are now paying a pathetic $300 million to say, oh, we'll rejuvenate a bit of that habitat, instead of just saying we're going to stop being ecological criminals by killing biodiversity. They are criminals. I would like to say this very, very clearly on your radio program, because when you destroy so much of life, knowingly, in the case of cancer, they knew that the releases have just come out. 25 years ago, they knew glyphosate is a carcinogen. They know, and yet they carry on.
You know, when people hear the terms biodiversity, sometimes I don't think they realize how broad it actually needs to be to guarantee that we all have the seeds that we need. I know that you saved over 3,000 rice varieties in India alone. 3,000. And Monsanto's trying to just introduce their particular GMO seed. They're doing that in many different areas. We have areas of concern here in California regarding why would Monsanto be so primarily interested in patents and in registering seeds such as, say, cannabis seeds. And could you talk a little bit about what they get out of it?
You know what? Before you answer that, Doctor, I would ask you if we could do a little role play here.
Oh, okay.
And I would ask the doctor to play Monsanto for a minute. I know that's a horrible thing to ask.
Oh, that's horrible to ask her.
But
Doctor, I apologize.
Yeah, I apologize for this. But imagine so you're in a world where a lot of countries are starting to rebel against Monsanto products. And even in the United States, there's a growing groundswell of folks that are anti-Monsanto and their products.
Right. Yes.
And then here in California, one of the biggest cash crops that we have here in California is cannabis. And I'm sure that most people know that cannabis traditionally has been used very efficiently for everything from, food to fiber to,
medicine,
all these different things. Of course, they focus on it for smoking, but really that's the least of its uses. Right. And so now if you're Monsanto and you're in a situation where, like corn, soy, canola, rice. These are all legal crops, right? A lot easier to get in and do the work they want to do there. But if you're starting with a crop that's already way strictly regulated, right? So it's already a crop that's illegal.
Right. And thus vulnerable.
And then you have states passing laws outside of, let's say, federal control. So, for example, right now in Colorado, you can be doing GMO cannabis, and there's no FDA oversight. There's no oversight whatsoever, as would be with any other GMO crop in the United States.
Right.
And so now we're about to do the same thing in California, and it seems like people have their head in their sand about this. But considering all this, the dynamics of that situation, if you were Monsanto, would this not be a real cherry for you to get in there and try to pick?
Well, we can see very clearly how Monsanto's mind works. If I was Monsanto, I never will be, and I hope there will be no Monsanto, because people around the world rise up and show the power of people when governments fail to defend democracy and people's rights. But coming back to being Monsanto, the first thing is, how dare any life form be independent of me and my control? So I'm going to own, I'm going to manipulate, I'm going to not just own all life forms, including those where I can find huge profits, which will be crops that are eaten on a very large scale. And if they are not eaten on a large scale, spread them and find new uses of them. Find new uses of biofuel for biodiesel from soya and ethanol from corn, and feed animals. Turn a lot of grain into animal feed. Continue to divert food from humans and call it feeding the world. I will control the climate data, which is what Monsanto has done.
Yes.
They have bought the world's largest climate data corporation. They have bought the world's largest soil data corporation. 15 years ago, they tried to privatize water with a dream and an idea that the irrigation water would have the chemicals that would allow the crop to grow. They have bought up Delta and Pineland, which has what is called the Terminator patent, basically a sterility technology, which can only be reversed with the chemicals that Monsanto owns, and triggers the reversal. But a farmer who has that seed cannot get a crop from that seed. Patents are designed for a farmer to not save seed. In my view, it is not just telling the farmer, you will be my slave, my serf, you will be under my control, but it is telling the seed, you will be enslaved to my will. Absolutely. Because the seed's nature is to reproduce, multiply, and spread around. And to tell a seed you won't become 1 into 1,000 or 1 into 1,000,000, you're going to stay 1 to 0, so I can constantly bring a commodity for sale that's patented and brings me royalty. It is a vision of total control based on a very, very narrow base of knowledge, distorted at that, as I mentioned, mechanistic science, a tyranny against scientists, tyranny against citizens, tyranny against farmers, no matter which part of society you look at. You look at India, you see the tyranny against farmers. You look at Argentina, you look at the tyranny against citizens and children. Right. You look across the world, any scientist who made any contribution, they would have liked to shut all of us down. So it is ultimate totalitarianism. I call it bioimperialism. Mm-hmm. So if I was Queen Isabel and King Ferdinand in 1492, I said, Columbus, go out and sail with this patent in your hand. It was called the letter patent. And colonize any land that we don't own and we don't rule. Monsanto's taken it to one step higher and said, we are the emperor of all life on the planet. That's why the Pope's encyclical is so important at this time. Because it is allowing humanity to remember who we are. And I notice a lot of those who live off corporate funding in the United States are panicking and saying the Pope should do his job. But he is doing his job. He is telling us how humans should relate to nature. He is telling us arrogance and creating empires over the world is so inappropriate. It's inappropriate in all faiths. He's reminding Christians it's also inappropriate in the Christian faith.
Doctor, if we could, I wanted to just take you back to the role play just for another minute here, and try to put you on another side of the fence, if especially concerning possible GMO cannabis. It's something that we're possibly facing here in the near future in California. So we always play a clip on here of you saying basically that just because a law isn't written by Monsanto, if it restricts the seed, if it restricts your ability to access seed or trade seed, that would in effect be a Monsanto law. That's who it would be serving. And so I'd like to ask you, if you were involved in writing legislation about a specific plant here in California, cannabis, for example, wouldn't it just be smart to throw in a section guarding against GMOs? I mean, wouldn't that kind of be a no-brainer?
Would that stop Monsanto? Yes, that's what we're looking for.
Well, or because the other option is the folks that are writing these initiatives right now they're purposely ignoring this kind of language. They're leaving it completely absent from every piece of legislation that's coming in any state right now concerning cannabis. And we see this as a window of opportunity for Monsanto when a lot of the world is saying, we don't want your products, we don't want this and that. We see the cannabis issue as an opportunity for Monsanto to get right back in the saddle in a way that...
You've already experienced. I mean, you saw the lies in the golden rice and in other things.
Yeah.
What would you say?
I go back to 1980s, the mid-1980s. Yeah. And as Monsanto, I literally wrote the Intellectual Property Rights Laws of World Trade Organization to push for patenting of life forms and patenting of seed. And because movements grew, I had to become broader in my initiatives and not just try and control through patents.
Right.
I had to start controlling in two other ways. First, criminalizing the seed saving that ordinary farmers and gardeners do. And for that, I started to get laws passed around the world that would make open-pollinated seeds and plant material available in society. The only source would be from me, because I'm going to buy the rest of the biotech companies. I'm trying to buy Syngenta just now. So I'll be the one company right now. There are five. 5 is too many. It's too much of a crowd. There needs to be just me. And seed laws are being passed around the world. I tried in India, but they resisted it because they had Gandhi and they know how to do civil disobedience and satyagraha, and they stopped it. I tried to get it passed in Europe, and it was stopped there because meddling activists and scientists wrote a law of the seed to show how seed works and got that reversed. I tried in Colombia, and there too the peasants rose. I'm trying now in the heart of the United States, both by going into crops, which nobody is noticing, but which will be vital in the future, like cannabis, but also going after seed libraries, getting laws passed to say seed libraries are illegal, only GMOs should be legal, or seeds that I have patents on and monopoly rights on. That is my game plan.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for being in that role and letting us hear that.
I wonder what you would think of. We just did actually our communications engineer and Ray and I were some of the folks that helped put an initiative on our local ballot here in the last election, and it was called the Freedom to Garden Human Rights Restoration Act. And the idea there was to reestablish by declaration the human right, the naturally endowed human right to garden the naturally occurring seeds and plants of the earth, and then within that context, hopefully create protection, because if you have a human right to access and grow those naturally occurring seeds and plants of the earth, then it would seem to follow that those seeds and plants that are naturally occurring must be protected from GMO cross-pollination contamination. So
absolutely, and that freedom to farm in that way and the freedom to garden as a human right is so vital. That draft becomes even more important because on 1st of January of 2015, Sacramento passed a seed law.
Yes, they did.
Which has 4 strange clauses that you can't exchange seed beyond 30 miles. So I've been suggesting to everyone, go to 30.5 miles and exchange seeds and do a satyagraha. It goes on to say that without corporate funding of breeding and agriculture research, there will be no improvement, which is so false, because what's the improvement of 20 years of Monsanto's contributions? Crops that have a toxic gene called Bt and have a herbicide-resistant gene called Roundup Ready. Is that an improvement, or is it a regression for evolution? Is it a regression for ecology? Is it a regression for the human diet? Another clause is that no entity below the level of the state can pass any law that will have an impact of seed, which is destroying the fabric of decision-making at the local level. It's destroying decentralized democracy. So California must be in the lead to counter that law with other laws passed at local level. Interestingly, the fracking wasn't stopped because Washington said, let's make fracking illegal. They made fracking legal by changing the Clean Water Act. But it was communities that said, we will not allow fracking and use the rights of nature as the plank. Where is rights of nature closer than in biodiversity and seed and the plants we live with and that feed us? So community initiatives, community laws, continuing to build a pressure. And I can't imagine too many Californians who would say, give us GMOs. You try to fight this through the labeling initiative, but I think we need every kind of initiative. We need lots of gardens. We call them gardens of hope and seeds of freedom. And this is a movement that just needs to spread.
That's why we brought this Freedom to Garden Human Rights Restoration Act, in part because, even though I fully support the labeling campaigns, it seems that we need to protect immediately the naturally occurring varieties of plants before just about anything else. And so it was, and we didn't have any funding. We didn't have any advertising. We had 2 opponents that spent thousands of dollars to oppose us with advertising and signs. And we still managed to get 1 out of 3 voters
to support us,
just out of just out of their common sense, reading the thing. So, and the idea there is that here's a place where no matter what your political demographic is, we've talked to conservatives, progressives, etc. They all feel that they have a certain human right
Mm-hmm.
to garden for their own needs. And so we felt like it was a good place to go, not only to try to protect nature, but to also try to cross-connect people that might be disagreeing on the labeling or whether
as well.
GMOs are good or bad for you,
Yeah.
for example. But they...
Because you just engage in the positive activity that is your duty to do.
Right.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
You know, and to quote you, to save and share seeds of life and freedom.
Absolutely.
We
And,
must.
you know, for 30 years, this is the work I've done because I don't think there's any other freedom more basic than this.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, and when you hear the misinformation, what is a way we could use to approach that to get the right information out? What has been successful?
Spread the right information and just shift the turf.
Just do it. Okay.
Shift
Okay.
the turf, and the way to deal with the Monsantos are to create a world where they have no role.
Mm-hmm.
If we do the gardens, they have no role in those gardens. If we choose to grow our food or buy local and know what we are eating, not because some centralized authority told us what we are eating, but we know through our direct experience and full knowledge, they become irrelevant. The only way to deal with abusive corporate power in our times is to make them irrelevant. And the other day I told Bill McKibben, I said, divesting financially through fossil fuels or from fossil fuels and coal is one thing, but the most important divestment is through our lives and the choices we make every day. We've got to divest from that criminal sea.
Thank you.
Every week we come on here and try to spark people into rethinking what it means to be a human and what the responsibilities are with that. And we're talking in basic ways. You need food, air, water, these basic things. And we've also tied it, and I want to bring this up because I've heard you, mention that to you, saving seed, planting seed, in fact, probably your whole mission here is a spiritual mission for you.
Yes.
And I would just like to say that that's what we, in our First Amendment here in the United States in the Constitution, we have this word religion that people have used for all different means to manipulate and control and et cetera, but us, the general population, haven't used that word to reclaim our humanness and what it means to be a human being and have that be protected by that word in the Constitution. And I think this issue of seeds and how it goes directly, it has to go to, I'm going to use the word religion, it has to go there. You can use the word spiritual, whatever, but in the law here, it's the word religion that protects you and should protect you and your activity with those seeds as being a basic human function, which would be a basic foundation to any sort of, religious belief, spiritual belief, all of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And religion, the word just means to be related.
Yes.
Yeah.
To be related
Yeah.
to the planet, to the earth, to nature. That awareness is the awareness that is the deeply religious awareness, not a political religious awareness, because political religion is about politics, it's about destruction, it's about division, it's about violence.
Yeah.
The deep religion is about spirituality, about connection. And when even physics teaches us that in quantum theory, that everything is connected, nothing is separable. If even physics is waking up and woke up 100 years ago, shouldn't the living dimensions of our life, the food we eat, the plants we grow, be even more connected to this interwoven view of life, where we are part of nature, not separate, not masters, not conquerors, but part of a very fragile web of life, and there's no higher place to be. The crazy idea that destruction of the planet, destruction of biodiversity, destruction of seed makes us more powerful human beings is an illusion, because if the web that supports us is fractured and broken, we too are broken.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Geez.
Oh,
Go ahead, Ray.
yeah. You mentioned that the way to get the word out there is just, in fact, to do it. Awakening populations is very, complicated and difficult, people think. But you have very successfully done that in many, many different places in the world. What would you say is the simple first step to awaken populations to the dangers of what could break the web of life?
Well, I follow Gandhi's example deeply. He just said, be the change you want to see.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing communicates bigger than your action.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yes. Thank you. Where do you see us going next as people who hold the web of life so precious? Where do you intend to go next?
Well, of course, I intend to continue to do the work. I intend to go into more fragile places.
Mm-hmm.
We started, I got lots of calls from Nepal after the earthquake disaster.
Yes.
And we started to collect seeds from our farmers and got them loaded onto a truck, took them. And interestingly, because we took seeds to the Nepalese farmers who are just across the border from us, I'm sure many of the seeds we use came from Nepal someday. Mm-hmm. After all, the Nepalese used to govern my area. They used to rule our area.
Uh-huh.
So there is biologically no border between Nepal and my part of India.
Mm-hmm.
And yet Monsanto and its companions were already there, not distributing seed. Because you can't reach those high villages with those disasters, but preventing other seeds from reaching the farmers.
Wow.
So in the heart of a disaster, they would rather let people die of hunger than allow viable seed that's ecologically adapted to their ecosystem and their diet reach them. But we conquered that. The seeds are with the farmers. They're being distributed right now. My colleagues are in Nepal. In areas in India where the agrarian crisis has been made so severe by the extractive economy that chemical and seed corporations set up, where they talk about growing more food, but chemicals have never grown food. Good soils have, good breeding and good selection has, lots of pollinators have. That's where food comes from. In fact, my new book, which has already been released in Italy for the Expo, which is dedicated to feeding the world, is called Who Feeds the World? And it will be out next spring in the United States from
great.
North Atlantic Books. I'm now going into areas where the agrarian crisis is so deep in India and to work literally from the middle of the tragedy to say no more suicide.
Can you tell us something about your work on biopiracy?
Yeah.
Is that the right term?
Yeah.
We're concerned about that as well. We think that here in California, in the situation we've been describing with cannabis, is just ripe for biopiracy.
Okay, so the biopiracy. I basically realized that if anything is patentable, then these corporations are going to take every precious plant that heals or feeds us, and they're going to patent it.
There it is.
And sure enough, down the line came the patent on neem, which is a beautiful tree that we've used for centuries for healing, as a pesticide, as a fungicide, even, it's the village toothbrush. We've used it as a contraceptive. And a patent was taken, U.S. government, with a company called W.R. Grace.
Yes.
And I decided to challenge it as a big movement. I collected 100,000 signatures from Indians of every walk of life, physicians, farmers, village healers, and took the case to the European Patent Office and fought it for 11 years and had that patent revoked.
Right.
It took us 11 years. I come from the valley Dehra Dun, which is famous for its basmati rice, the aromatic rice. Is a Texas company called Rice Tech claimed to have invented our rice. That was in 98. The company is called Rice Tech, and there's this interesting It tells you. You say you take rice and you put tech, and it gives you the right to steal anyone's rice.
Yeah, and say you
pretend
invented
that
it.
you invented it.
Mm-hmm.
We fought that case, broad campaigns, lots of cases, and most of the claims were struck down.
Mm-hmm.
More recently, Monsanto patented an ancient Indian wheat, which does not contribute to gluten allergies, because allergies come from breeding wheat in a way to increase its expression of gluten for higher elasticity for industrial manufacture. Old wheats don't have those properties. And with so many people having gluten allergies, Monsanto thought, here's a perfect patent. It'll give us a worldwide market. And we had to challenge that, and they had to drop that patent also.
Wonderful.
They have 1,500 patents, Monsanto and others, on climate-resilient crops, which they have not invented, because climate resilience, like drought or tolerating salt or tolerating floods, are complex traits. Many genes work together. Engineering of genes means moving one gene.
Yes.
You cannot do genetic engineering of multi-genetic traits. So basically they pirate those traits from farmers breeding, maybe add another gene for BT or something else, claim to have invented it. They have 1,500 claims. And our way of resisting that is both spreading the awareness, because how do you fight 1,500 cases? But most importantly, the community seed banks, in which we have saved rices and crops of all of these traits. So when the cyclone takes place in Orissa, we have those seeds. When a tsunami takes place in Tamil Nadu, we have those seeds.
Right.
We can send them over to Indonesia when farmers come from there to deal with the tsunami impact. And to have these seeds in everyone's hands means, A, you render the patents toothless, and you render biopiracy an empty threat. Second, you make GMOs shrink in their relevance, because you have brought more accessibility to the original material which they were pirating.
Yeah, so anything that infringes on our rights to have seed banks is something we should be instantly suspicious of.
Absolutely. And the seed libraries, that are being closed down, and all these new laws like the California seed law.
Right.
Oh, by the way, the California seed law says from now on the word person will include corporations. Just for that clause alone, that law needs to be challenged. Corporations are not persons. They're legally constructed entities to which society assigns few limited rights. And society has the right to withdraw those rights when they become antisocial and they start destroying our precious ecological base.
It's pretty amazing that, that they're even allowed to grow GMOs in open-air fields. I mean,
absolutely,
it's unbelievable to me. And here in California, we're told, if we want to grow a cannabis plant in this county, you've got to grow it indoors under lights. It seems reversed there, the logic.
Right.
But anyways, it's we're just so thankful that you for all your work and you are truly an environmental hero, Dr. Shiva, and we just can't thank you enough for being here today.
Thank you, and if you will give me permission, I will now go to bed.
Oh God, that's right. It is very late in India, and we really appreciate that as well. And
thank you
all right.
very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Marvelous. What an honor.
Gee, we need more people like that in this world.
Boy. Somebody who's worked to make sure the seeds of suicide are not being sown anywhere.
Right.
I mean, when you look at the list of countries where she's worked, you look at the list of panels and advisories and groups that she's participated in, a truly amazing, amazing advocate.
Notice when we brought up GMO cannabis, she didn't say, well, I'm not worried about that.
No, she certainly did not. In fact, she told us exactly how they would proceed.
This is KPFG 88.1 FM, Lake County Community Radio.
We're on location at the Heirloom Seed Expo in Santa Rosa at the fairgrounds. And we're here today with Dr. Vandana Shiva. Hi, thank you for being with us. We'd love to hear about, your latest book, for sure. And if you could give us some idea about that.
Well, because I have many books, and this year about 3 have come out. One is on seed sovereignty and food security in women's hands, which is really a collection of writings, women, both scientists as well as women at the grassroots, saving seeds, but resisting the propaganda that is called the science of genetic engineering, because there is no science in genetic engineering. It counters everything that science says. I've done a book for the Milan Expo called Who Really Feeds the World, and that should be coming out in the United States this spring. But most importantly, for the Expo, we have put together Seed Satyagraha. Satyagraha is Gandhi's word for non-cooperation, and it's basically a call for civil disobedience to end seed slavery. Because the challenge we have is twofold. One, to resist bad law, and freedom has never been defended. If we obey laws of slavery, we'd still have slavery. If people like Thoreau hadn't resisted and said, the only obligation which I have is to assume to do at any time what I think is right. It is truly enough said that a corporation has no conscience. Law never made men a whit more just, and by means of their respect for it, even the well-disposed are daily made the agents of injustice. And Gandhi said, as long as the superstition exists that unjust laws must be obeyed, so long will slavery exist. But the other side of it is we have a duty to do the right thing for the earth, for each other, for community, and those are the higher laws we must obey. And that's why I'm very, very glad that you all are working on the Freedom to Garden, the Human Rights Restoration and Natural Seed and Plant Protection Act, because that's the positive law. While we have to say no to the insane laws that try and turn seed into intellectual property or make saving seed illegal. Seed really has become the centerpiece of the struggle against slavery for freedom.
Absolutely.
It's exciting to hear you say that.
Yeah, it really is. And I should say that I walked into a federal court about 15 years ago and filed a case, a civil suit, claiming that humans have a natural right, basically what the human right to possess and grow seed for your own use. And it was a twofold. It was one based on a natural law that everybody's born with this natural right. The other was my conscience. They said, we have neither. This is a federal judge told me, no, your conscience doesn't count here, and you also don't have this human right unless, basically, it's declared and attached to the 9th Amendment, like the Bill of Rights. So, in other words, he said, you've got no case in court claiming this human right until the population decides you have this right. That's why we wrote the Freedom to Garden Act. I know some of us are concerned that we feel that all the energy in the movement is going towards trying to label or trying to ban. From my perspective, both of those things are in the commercial arena, right? So where government has jurisdiction over commerce, so Congress can come in any time and snuff out these efforts, like they're trying to do right now with the DARK Act.
Right.
So we're hoping that more people become aware of the fight for the human right, which is something Congress wouldn't be able to change because it's attached to the 9th Amendment.
Yes.
How do you feel about that?
Well, I think that needs to be connected to the fact that the California state has actually passed a law on the 1st of January, the seed law AB 2470, which attempts to precisely take away that right. So the two things need to go hand in hand. The new act adds that corporations are now persons, that a neighbor is within 3 miles, someone at 4 miles isn't your neighbor, and that's dependence on the corporations is vital to improve seed,
right,
which is so wrong.
right.
The law also says that no level below the state can make any law related to seed, which would preempt your act, which is why you should do the two things side by side.
On its face, it seems like it would, but actually, because their law is about commerce, this law goes to your constitutional right and your human right. This would do an end around on this seed law. It really, in my experience, I think it would.
Yeah.
I think that it goes above it.
Hold on.
Yeah.
There we go. Shoot. I turned that off. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Now we're good. Yeah, so we're really, so for example, if this was a commercial type law, we'd have to go to the state attorney general and get her permission to basically put it on the ballot because of this law you just referred to.
Right.
But because this has to do with a human right, we think we can get around that. We think we don't need her permission because this goes straight to the Constitution and the human right. So we're really hoping. I mean, I know some communities are trying to do community rights, and from my perspective, community rights, even commerce, all these rights are supposed to be built from your individual human, built around what's already established by you being born, which is your human rights, which is what the Constitution is supposed to protect. So I sort of feel like it would be really a great thing for us all if more and more people were thinking in terms of fighting for their human rights. Well, instead of like right now, everybody's just fighting against Monsanto or fighting against labor or fighting for labor.
On regulations and patents and laws,
right,
rather than on the human rights.
Gandhi,
the native natural rights,
was focused on human rights.
Yeah.
Malcolm X focused on human rights. And I think this movement needs to. How do you feel about that?
No, I totally agree that the time is right for humanity to not just reclaim the human rights and defend them in the face of corporate rights, which are the only rights being written into law today.
Yes.
But I would take it even further, that our power to fight for our human rights comes from our power for responsibility to take care of the earth.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the duty to take care is the ground for the human rights,
Absolutely.
to garden it.
Absolutely. That's it. That's the key. And, well, I know you don't have much time, and I really
Oh, we're so
appreciate
appreciative
this.
that you
No,
spent this
thank
time
you.
with us.
I just done a lot of traveling today, and I didn't
You
want
have.
to impose it on you because it's not a treat to be on these silly highways.
Oh, yes, we know.
Yeah.
We know. It's really...
So even though it's short,
It's,
it at least saves you from another
yeah,
trip.
and these are the things that we hope to hear and share
Yeah.
with others. So
Yeah.
thank you so very
But
much.
keep at.
We'll,
You can do a program on it. Yours to
Absolutely.
use, and it's a sister to this.
All right.
if you would do us the big favor of letting people know about
I
this.
will in my talk today.
Oh,
Jeez,
that's
you're beautiful.
marvelous.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
Oh my gosh.
One more thing.
Please have a safe
Can
trip.
we take a picture with you too? Sure.
Oh,
Oh my goodness, that's so
okay.
This is a Turning Point public service announcement. The carrot test. Are you of the understanding that you were born with the natural human right to plant, grow, harvest and eat a carrot? If your answer is yes, then by constitutional protections and jurisdictional outlines, you have the same protected natural right to plant, grow and utilize cannabis. When considering voting for an initiative or supporting legislation, or supporting organizations that have anything to do with cannabis, it is imperative to your evaluation that whoever or whatever you support can not only pass the carrot test, but should reflect the same understanding in text and actions or campaigns and so forth. The carrot test is the Occam's razor response to the plant species cannabis being outlawed through regulation and or now being legalized through the same relative jurisdictional regulations. The human rights and constitutional problem with outlawing plants are the same in that humans are born with the right to plant, cultivate, harvest and use the naturally occurring plant material for the many needs of their lives from food and medicine to clothes and so forth. The Constitution of the United States was first and foremost intended to protect the naturally endowed rights of human beings. The Constitution has also provided for government authority to regulate commerce. The corporate government has blurred the lines of jurisdictional authority in that government has outlawed your constitutionally protected naturally endowed right to garden for yourself and your family by way of its jurisdictional authority over commerce. In any honest equation aimed at repairing the obvious disparages described here, one need first run the carrot test. The carrot test is simply to ask the question, does this proposal, candidate, or organization represent an effort to restore my human right to grow and use natural plants for my own needs? This without exception is the first question we should all be asking, because all other commercial regulatory laws need to be formulated on the secure foundation of your human rights, or they will continue to not only jurisdictionally extinguish your natural rights, but they will bury any possible litigious path back to restoring such rights. People and legislators all over the country are holding meetings and hearings in effort to regulate, tax and legalize cannabis in some way. All such activity goes to concede that the corporate government has legitimate jurisdictional authority to outlaw your naturally endowed human rights. It is our responsibility to demand our naturally endowed rights be restored. Instead, led by a corporate legalization scheme, we are being led down a path where corporations supplant our need for natural human rights. Our job as humans is to make sure our children are born into a world that lives together and protects naturally endowed physical rights. It's time to honor our responsibility to future generations by bringing these issues to federal court, where we should be holding government to account for crimes against humanity and nature, and where we should be demanding the restoration of our naturally endowed human rights. This has been a Turning Point public service announcement.
Homegrown's alright with me. Homegrown is the way it should be.